All right, welcome back to Metal and Forge. This is episode 3, hosted by Patrick, Kent, and Austin. Metal and Forge is a weekly podcast discussing manhood, entrepreneurship, American life, and matters of the soul. Mettle, M-E-T-T-L-E, speaks to a person's ability to cope well with difficulties or under pressure, to face a demanding situation in a spirited and resilient way, and I like the way that sounds. Forge, what you allow yourself to turn into over time when you are facing the pressures of life. You're being forged by them. So, as we seek to grow our metal and test our metal and forge forward into whatever it is that God has for us as men, we want to talk about it here on this show with you. We'd like to invite you to visit the website, mettleandforge.com. That's M-E-T-T-L-E, mettleandforge, Forge.com. You can submit questions or topics, things you'd like to hear us talk about on the show. You can do so anonymously if you would like to. So to kick things off tonight, what I really just want to get us talking about is, this is kind of a flyer, but what $100 purchase have you made that has revolutionized your life? $100 or less. So it can be $10, but something under $100 that you've purchased doesn't have to be recently. It can be something that's been in your kit for a little while, but what do you like?
So this was a little bit more than $100, but I got my second cowboy hat of my life a few weeks ago on Broadway, and I freaking love this thing.
It looks
the
great.
fit is, man, doesn't it look good?
Yeah.
I haven't worn it much. It's the first white cowboy hat that I've ever had. I've worn one for a couple decades. I had a black one, Austin, you might remember.
Yep.
And I was down on Broadway with Ava. I spent the day with the kids when they turned 10, because that's when my dad died. So I'll spend the day with her. We're down on Broadway, and I got this thing. It's so comfortable. But mostly I just wanted to show you guys this hat. This doesn't qualify for your question, Patrick, because it was over $100. But I do have an answer to your question. Thank you. I do have an answer to your question. This is actually $100 a month, but it was the thing I thought about the most that revolutionized my life, which is getting supplemented for testosterone. I started that, I think it was in 2022. Yeah. So about 2.5 years ago now, and it is $100 a month. It's not $100 one-time purchase, but
yeah,
it was super helpful with energy, clarity of mind, just overall health. You know, everyone tends to think of ED with testosterone. It's highly unfortunate because honestly, of the 6 or 8 guys that I had known that had gotten on of it, none of it were doing it for those reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something about our environment. It has to do with your habits and stuff too, but it seems like it's real easy to have your testosterone levels to be way lower than they should be these days. So
it's a big problem.
I'll throw it out there for guys.
Yeah, no, we should maybe do a whole show on TRT and related hormone questions.
Yeah, I would just say if someone's over 35 years old and they just feel consistently low energy, brain fog, moody, depressed, down, anxious, not really sure what's why, the diet's decent, exercise is decent, not really sure what's going on, I would definitely check your testosterone levels. But the other thing I want to say, Patrick, here we're on episode 3, and this is the first episode where I finally have a decent mic. So I'm very sorry to the listeners. On episode 1, the producer wound up working his magic. I think episode 1 is decent. I think it's actually kind of okay. It's kind of fine. Episode 2, my audio sucked, and I'm real sorry about that. I hate bad audio. I think I got it fixed. Sorry, everybody. You would think I've done enough of a podcast to have my shit together, but
Kent's come to the table with 3 purchases that have revolutionized his life. I like it. The hat does look revolutionary, and knowing that it's testosterone fueled too. I mean, it's just it just comes right through the screen at me. So, Austin, what are you thinking about your purchase?
Well, if he can have a couple, I can too, because I honestly was like racking my brain. The first thing is these things. These are little Shure in-ears. They were like $99 on Amazon. And I mean, for more than just podcasting, I use them when I do live music at church. and they're just nice. They block all the other sound out. They fit in real nice. I've had these things for years. Highly recommend. I mean, it's the best $100 I've spent for anything like on the musical side. Then the practical side, we have. I don't know if you guys have everything drawers at your house, where everything ends up in the drawer. Pens, knickknacks, whatever. We've got 2, 3 now probably. And I can never find batteries, and so you go to pull it out and it gets stuck, and you get mad, and like I was just like, dude, this is it. So I went on Amazon, and for $30 I bought a battery organizer. I screwed it to the wall. It has a little flip up lid on it, and it has a little tester. You can test the batteries to see where the strength is at. Oh, dude, it's been so amazing.
That's
like, I
good.
can just,
That's dad life right there. That's living the
Totally
dad life.
dad life.
that's
Yeah.
exactly
Now,
where
Austin,
I'm at.
Let me ask you this, Austin. Does Stephanie put dead batteries back in the drawer? Because my wife does.
I mean, we probably both do. Like, I hate dead batteries. Like, even if they're like halfway, I throw them away.
Yeah,
Throw 'em
What's
away.
the point? I mean, they're so cheap on Amazon
Throw 'em
these
away.
days. Like, throw them away. Like, just get a like. I hate them. Like, I hate popping covers off, putting new batteries in. So I'm like, that
So
has actually been amazing.
does this organizer just organize fresh batteries, or is it also a charger?
It's not a charger. It's just like
Okay.
it's got holes like for AA, AAA, like C's, D's, like all the different sizes, and there's like 25 or 30 holes for the most commonly used ones. And so I can see, like at a glance, oh, we're getting low on AA batteries. Let me go on Amazon, which are it's the best place to buy batteries, I found out too, by the way. I know, being really nerdy here, but
Yeah.
it's been
Do you get-
amazing.
Do you check the reviews and stuff before you?
I do, totally. I wasted a solid half an hour to 45 minutes of my life like researching this thing.
That's
I bought
awesome.
it, and I was like,
What about you, Miller? I'm curious.
yeah.
Well, there's a couple things that come to mind, but one, I'll start with the most mundane and tiny little item. But you know, when you get the mundane things right, your life actually ends up working fairly well.
Amen.
Did you know that nail clippers can suck? Have you ever
Yep.
used a nail clipper that sucks? Like,
Yes, I
it's,
have.
It's a struggle. So having a good nail clipper it's necessary. And a couple of years ago, I think for my 40th birthday, actually, I got a nail clipper that I still have in my DOP kit, and it's probably $40 or $50 on Amazon. It's about the size and approximate shape of a 1/3 of a popsicle stick, and it's exquisitely engineered, tiny little flat, sharp German nail clipper that it literally is the size and shape of about 1/3 of a popsicle stick. And it's awesome. It's the only nail clipper I use. So it's
You had me at
ridiculous.
German.
Pardon me?
You had me at German.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds
The
like you
German
could
engineering.
clip the devil's horns with that thing.
Yeah,
Miller.
well, it's tiny, but it works just right. So I've always hated nail clippers that suck. And you know, you go to the drugstore and you buy a nail clipper and it's just rough. So
Hey, can I say one more thing, Patrick? This
I'd
is the
love
only
that.
other thing that came to mind. You know, you see these people toting around their stainless steel, like water things, and the screw off handle has like a little plastic hanger on it, and everyone always walks around. You see them at church; they bring their own water bottle everywhere.
Sure.
These stainless steel jobbies, you know, they look like tools, and you kind of wonder, like, geez, isn't there water where you're going? But then you start doing that, and you realize, oh, this rocks.
Yeah.
So now I'm one of those tools carrying a stainless steel
Oh.
water bottle to church every Sunday.
I carry my Yeti with water everywhere. I don't care. I even have an
Serious?
Apple AirTag on it because I don't want to lose it.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's 2 more things under $100 that will change your life. So good deal. Well, thank you for that quick round. So what I want to talk about tonight is AI, robots, and the kingdom of heaven. And we'll get into a little bit what I'm thinking about. But I have been thinking about large language models. I've been thinking about language. I've been thinking about tools that we use to enhance our cognition, enhance our consciousness, and work together in a more effective way, make the world a better place. Fundamentally, that's what language is. It's a tool that we've adapted to better be able to map ourselves onto reality and better cooperate with each other and so forth. And in some sense, large language model, AI models, are just an extension of language as a tool to enhance our cognition, connect us more deeply, and help us to pick up on the underlying patterns in the world. And I know there's a lot of reasons to be cautious about AI, but I'm curious how you guys use AI and what you think about AI and whether it's something that what you think the future of AI is going to be. How do you see it? First of all, do either of you use an AI product on a regular basis, and how?
Yeah, I use ChatGPT. I have the app on my phone. I'm paying the $21.99 a month or whatever it is, and have for a few months. I don't use it very much, but the most frequent use for me of it is taking a picture of something and having it tell me what I need to know from that thing. And I'll give you two examples. We have this super old zero-turn lawnmower at the sales center that, breaks every third time we use it. And the alternator doesn't work, so you always have to charge the battery. And finally, I'm like, why don't we buy another battery for this thing so we can keep one battery charged, swap it out. It's not worth fixing the alternator because it's a piece of junk. And, I'm looking at this battery and I'm not very handy, as you might know, but I couldn't tell very quickly what this battery was. And I mean, I looked at it for 30 seconds, but I can scan things pretty quickly. Couldn't tell. Took a picture of it and said, what is this battery? Bam, instantly. It said exactly what the battery was, whether it was 6 volt or 12 volt. I mean, immediately. And somehow it picked up on something that I had missed scanning it over. The other was a panel box recently. I wanted to know if something was a 100 amp or a 75 amp panel box. Couldn't tell. Took a picture of whatever the gobbledygook was on the inside door of the panel box. Boom, it immediately told me. So I'm using it actually mostly for stuff like that.
What
But
about
also I do use it for copywriting. Have used it for copywriting. Just if there's a project like a new website or something, I was using it a lot for that. So I don't use
Sure.
it very much on a daily basis. I'm still paying the $20 a month. I think I mostly just sort of do that partly to keep up with it and sort of force myself to use it because it's definitely the way of the future.
Yeah. Austin, you use any kind of AI tools?
I just signed up for something for real estate where I take pictures of a house and I give it to this program and it will automatically create a storybook with like pictures and it text based off of the pictures, something that I can share. This is not this is real estate specific, but I I haven't used Chat GPT myself. I mean, I've seen instances where it could be used in my industry or field, but I don't really. It's not really infiltrated the real estate market yet in a big way. So, other than marketing, I'm sure there's people that use it to write descriptions and
Yeah.
things like I described,
Do
but
you
it's not
think
real big.
Do you guys think that AI is, in its current implementation as a large language model, is truly revolutionary, or is it more iterative, similar to Google search?
It's iterative so far, but it will become revolutionary.
Great.
Yeah, I tend to think you're right. It is iterative now, and it is best, I think, understood as a supercharged kind of Google search with an algorithm attached to it, a predictive algorithm. And so it can only rearrange information that it's been trained on in novel ways. It can't generate any truly novel concepts that it hasn't been trained on.
Yes.
Now, there is
At
some
least that we have
evidence.
been exposed to.
Yeah, there is some evidence that if you get really, really intricate with the prompts, that you can actually get it to generate some. You get it to hallucinate, which is it spits back facts that aren't true. But when it's hallucinating, it's essentially coming up with new ideas that, they're ideas that aren't true, but that same process can, I think, also yield maybe something that's actually novel, an actual new idea or new thing. But
Agreed. And Patrick, can I?
Go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. Go ahead. No, you go.
I was just wrapping that up to say that I think it's mostly iterative and not yet truly revolutionary.
Agreed. The one thing I like about it is, and I still almost 9 times out of 10 are using Google to Google stuff because I like the different things that pop up. I want to see what my options are. I guess the type of stuff I tend to Google, it's like, that's what I want. But what I do like about ChatGPT is, like, the other week I was curious how many electoral college votes come per state. And I could have Googled it, but I know what I'd gotten on Google. I'd have gotten a bunch of links. Here's a chart here. Here's this. Is this outdated? Blah, blah, blah. You just ask ChatGPT and it gives you a list.
Yeah.
You know, you wanted to know one thing and you learned one thing. And you didn't have to sort through anything to get the information. I love it for stuff like that too.
Yeah. I think I've never used it the way you described, Kent, which is the image recognition, like give it an image and have it tell you about an image. I should try that. I also pay for the premium version because I do some copywriting with it. But I like it for taking what I'm thinking and poking holes in it or figuring out what I'm missing, mostly figuring out what I'm missing. So, here's a list of 10 things in a category. What are 50 things in this category? What did I not think of? So it's useful for that, and it kind of expands my thinking in that way. Robert Greene, who wrote 48 Laws of Power, he wrote Mastery, a bunch of other books. He's super duper superstar author. He's concerned about people relying on ChatGPT or relying on large language models and becoming kind of calcified in our thinking or not pushing ourselves to think as hard. And so I do worry about that. Sometimes when I'm writing, I'm kind of curious and kind of, I don't know, I have kind of a fascination with how quickly I tend to think, oh, let me run over to ChatGPT and just test that idea or expand that idea, or rather than really wrestling with something, it's really easy just to jump over there and kind of, well, let me see 50 things in this category and see if I missed something that I really want to pull in here. And that, I don't know how to feel about that, because in some sense it expands your consciousness, and it's like, well, there's 48 things I didn't think of. And now I'm thinking about them, and now I can connect things that I hadn't previously connected. And so it's kind of expansive in that sense, but I can see Robert's point in that it also does kind of short circuit the need for, it's like putting bands on your weights to make it easier, some kind of an assist on your weight bar to make it easier to lift in some sense.
I could see his argument for that. I would think about that somewhat similar to how I've been treating if there's a debate going on, or someone is doing an interview, with the election coming up. Kamala or Trump's doing an interview. I'm not watching many of them, but particularly the debates. My philosophy is I want to watch the whole thing, and I don't want too many inputs. I don't want to know what anyone's saying about it. I want to develop my own opinions, and I might tweet something out about that, and then I want to see what's everyone else seeing, because I don't want my opinion infiltrated by just everyone else's thoughts, and then I just reflect back, So I could see the same being true with ChatGPT. It probably depends like what you're thinking about, what you're working on, because in some things, if you had this genius PhD sitting right beside you who had a PhD in what you were writing about, it would seem efficient and wise to get that input as you go along. But, I can see the point if you just rely on it too quickly.
Yeah.
Just not sure if I'd be too worried about that yet.
Yeah, I do use it every day, I think. And so far it's been a helpful tool. But in the back of my mind, I'm always kind of interested in how it could become a crutch. And I'm just trying to be aware of that. So, which, speaking of language and how fundamental language is as a tool to expand our consciousness and help us to, be together in community. There's the idea of the logos in the New Testament. Well, in scriptures, the idea of, there's a Greek word logos, which is something like the creative word, the truth. And the logos is what John talks about in John 1 when he says, in the beginning was the word, in the beginning was the logos, and the logos was with God. James 1:21 says that the logos has been planted in us and we need to submit to it. And the logos is also that which spoke all things into being. In Genesis, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and he used the logos to do that. And so the logos is fundamental to reality, and it's the word. It's the eternal word, and it's our words united to the eternal word. And as I think about, well, what are my words? And if I use a tool like ChatGPT, are those my words? And is that the logos, and what are the implications for extending my words, to outsourcing some of my words to this intelligence. I think when we surrender to God or submit to that word which has been planted in us, like it talks about in James 1:21, we want to become one with God. We want to be united with Christ. And so we want the logos to come forward from us in a way that's unhindered by our ego consciousness. We want it to flow forward, without fear and without, our kind of mediating layer of consciousness. It's the lower kind of consciousness, like shame and guilt and some of those things. We just want to let it flow, truthfully speaking the logos. And that's what creates, I think, the kingdom of heaven around us, is us speaking the truth in love together. And I was just thinking about what the implications for that, the manifestation of the kingdom of heaven, for example, and the logos. What are the implications for that related to large language models? Does that kind of become a part of the logos when I extend my speech using these models? We're creating, I believe we create our shared reality together in community on an ongoing basis. And it's just interesting to think what these technologies that expand our consciousness, or do they collapse our consciousness? I think that's maybe what the core of the question is. Is this a tool that expands our consciousness or contracts it? Does it make us wiser or less wise? And wisdom patterns are these patterns that God has imbued in the universe, and we can discover them. And when we align our life to them, we're living in harmony with the way that God made things. And so that's wisdom, and we flourish. And does using a tool like ChatGPT, these large language models, can that put us more in touch with the patterns that are there? Can it help us to more harmoniously kind of live in accordance with the wisdom patterns that we can discover through engaging with these technologies and through this intelligence? Or does it dull our perception of those patterns? Does it enhance our perception or dull our perception? These are just things that are kind of rattling around my brain as I use these tools and try to wrestle whether or not it's something that's expansive for me or something that becomes a crutch for me. What do you guys think?
Go ahead, Austin.
I mean, I know I'm just thinking through the mind of a musician right now. Songwriting is something that I've kind of been dabbling in lately and have on and off in the past. And I mean, I think you can literally use this stuff to like write songs and at least lyrics. And I know that's a concern out there in the artist circle, is like, or what's going to happen to creativity. Like, I think what you're saying, Patrick, I don't think it's a problem if it's a help. But if it's a crutch, if it's the first thing we run to every time we got writer's block, or I mean, that's just what I'm thinking. Like, I don't know how healthy that is, because there's something about pushing through creativity and seeing something through to the end. And I just don't want it to become this instant gratification tool where, hey, I made it this far in this article, or this far in this song, or this far in this book, or whatever. And because the way I look at it, isn't AI basically like the data that it pulls from, isn't it all on the internet? And so it's just kind of like siphoning that data as you give it instruction. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, it's
like
doing
it's channeling it
algorithmically, doing
Right.
the math, figuring out what's the most likely next letter here.
Right. And that would be I don't even know if it's a concern. It's just something I think about. How does that play out? Is songwriting as we know it in 10 years from now look entirely different? Or writing books or research, or even research papers, like what does that look like? I mean, and probably the same argument could have been made back in the day for the internet, because people back then were probably like, oh, you can just Google it. And we had to go to the library and pull out this card of indexes and sort through it and get the book and read it and write it. And like you're just copy and pasting all this stuff into a Word doc and changing a little bit so it's not plagiarism. But I don't know, just that's about the extent of my meditation on it, I guess.
The Patrick, this idea of the logos or the word is interesting because this is really the first time in technology that could even be a discussion, because Google, the iPhone, Uber, all these fantastic technological advancements, they didn't create words, but now AI is actually creating words. So it is sort of an interesting thing to think about. But the thing that stands out to me as it relates to logos and then also as it relates to creatives is there is one big difference though between, God speaking and our words and us speaking. And the thing that we have in common, I guess, with God is spirituality. And so there is something in us that AI does not have. AI is not spiritual. It does not have a soul. It doesn't share that common denominator with God, with the divine, with the creator. So that's a big difference. So I think that as it relates to AI saying words, there's just a difference in power. There's a difference in, we have a soul behind our words and AI does not. And I think that gets into the creative field. So, one of my neighbors, it is not tech savvy at all, but he must be a little bit more than I thought, because he had AI create a song for him and a couple of his friends at the office, and it was a country song. And I will say, this being created by someone who's not tech savvy at all, the words and the music, it was better than I would have thought that it probably would have been, but it was very, very vanilla. It was very what you would expect a country song to sound like,
It's like your
It
average
was,
Kane Brown song or Brantley
yeah,
Gilbert
it
or
was,
something like that.
yeah. You could, if you actually thought about it, and of course I knew because he told me AI, but knowing where it came from, you listen to it and you're thinking, man, that's not taking Taylor Swift's job as a songwriter anytime soon.
Yeah.
And, I do think the creatives, the songwriters, the artists, they have less to worry about. I do think the editors, maybe some of the producers at that level, I think they're going to have an issue. They're going to be competing with AI far before the creatives. And why is that? Well, I think because when someone is skilled at writing a song, they do have that soul. They do have that spirituality within them, whether they recognize it or not. And it can create some fantastic art. There's still something about the human experience that so far, it still creates the best art by far.
100%.
Where all that goes, I'm not exactly sure, but but, doesn't the Bible even say something about like, we know some things that the angels don't even know?
Mm-hmm.
Like even the angels can't quite see things through our eyes because they weren't human. They didn't experience what we experienced.
Right.
And, even God himself came down and became a human, and so if God himself has to live the experience, then, AI is not going to get there anytime soon if it ever does.
Yeah, I agree. And you're absolutely right. I mean, Jesus said in John 12:50, he said, I say whatever the Father tells me to say. In John 8:28, he says, I speak as the Father taught me. I think Jesus, the man, learned to live in harmony with God the Father, the inner divine Father that lived in him, flowed from him in a way that was unhindered by Jesus, the man's ego, because he had surrendered that fully. He had fully united to God the Father. And I mean, he did that. Let's be clear. I mean, he did that as a model for us, as a way to live, is to live in a way that you are united with God. And it's just interesting to think about the role that these large language models play in specifically in the area of our logos, our speech, because it's on one sense, it's not fundamentally different than the printing press, let's say, because a printing press made words much more, it expanded access to words radically, but it didn't generate new words. And, you could say, well, large language models don't really generate new words either. They're regurgitating everything that's already on the internet. And that's true. It does arrange them in new ways. So you're right. We're not there yet, to where it's truly generative. But we may get there. And that kind of, speaking of we may get there, Elon Musk just had an event where he also showed off some of these Optimus Prime robots, the humanoid robots. Have you seen those? You saw the
Yeah.
demo? Now, I think the cool thing about them is the way that they were able to move and able to walk and able to articulate their hands. And they had some really, I mean, the engineering and design is just unbelievable on that. And that's just version 1.0. I mean, imagine 5.0 or 10.0, version 10. But if you create something like that, and then you have an image to language model, a language model that's installed in it, and an image recognition system, and a system that turns images into text and into language, then you have something that can function in the world, probably at version 5 is probably functioning at, maybe 60% of what a human would be able to function as. You could certainly teach it to do a lot of mundane things, and interact with the world in a way that would be really useful to people, if that's the way you would want to use them. Do you think that the Optimus Prime and humanoid robots in general like that will become ubiquitous like cars or iPhones? And if not, why not?
Yeah, I do. And I was happy to see this on the docket. So I was going to wait for this to be a segue. Otherwise, I was just going to say it randomly on this podcast tonight, which is, I think Elon's last product launch presentation, whatever you call that thing, a couple weeks ago, look, I'll go so far as to say that might be the most consequential product launch of my lifetime so far. And I say that being a huge Steve Jobs fan, knowing that he did the best launches. He created the way Jobs kind of created the product launch idea, in the tech world. And I understand that the Apple phone was massively we don't think about that probably quite enough, because we think about Google, we think about the internet and stuff, but the smartphone, like, if we're okay opening it up outside of just Apple, but let's be honest, Apple got us this. The Samsung and the freaking Androids, that all came from Apple. That was, just the change that came from that is just, it's hard to put words to, because it affected everything.
Mm-hmm.
But that product launch, when you think about what was revealed that night, the cyber taxi. So now we're talking about Ubers that don't need drivers. The robovan. So now we're talking 14 to 20 people can get in something that drives by itself. So now we have less cars on the road. And Optimus, the robot. But the way they set it up, like, it was, I think he said 20 acres or 40 acres. And either they used, like, I was sort of assuming, I should have Googled this to find out. I was sort of assuming, like, they rented, like, some studio place in Hollywood, because it was like a village that was created. I don't know if they made it just for this product launch or if they rented someplace, but it was like an actual village with people walking the sidewalks and these cars driving around by themselves. But the reason I say that is, less because of the cyber taxi and the robovan, but more because of Optimus. And those three concepts together, self-driving taxis, and the robot together. I did think the production level of the event, it wasn't the best. But in terms if you think about like what was revealed that night, this robot being the main thing, I do think that was one of the most consequential product launches, and it didn't get much press. A lot of people don't like Elon for some reason, which is interesting. Particularly the mainstream, he seems to sort of not be on their side or whatever, so they're not really giving him the press I think he deserves. But yes, I do think those robots are going to be mainstream. I have no idea what the time frame is on it, but the thing about Elon is he does deliver. And it used to be he was knocked for not delivering on time. That seems to be maybe a little bit less of an issue than it was at one point. But let's say he's still 5 years off in his projection. It doesn't matter if he's 10 years off in his projection. If we have robots that can do household chores for $30,000 to $40,000, that's going to be a big freaking deal. And I think he said that he believes these robots are going to be the biggest product of all time, which, if you can get these things at 20 to 40 grand and they actually work and they actually interact with you at the level of speech and they take commands and they go take out the garbage and they go mow your yard and they go clean out your car and they babysit your kid. Yeah, that's going to revolutionize things like, we might not have seen except for maybe the smartphone.
Mm-hmm. Austin, do you have any thoughts on this?
I mean, it's the way of the world already. Like, we bought a Roborock is the brand of vacuum cleaner. And we bought it because, I finally convinced my wife, because I was like, listen, if, your time is valuable. Like, you hate doing this chore. I hate walking around dirty floors. For $1,000 or whatever this thing was, the thing literally vacuums the carpet. It like sweeps up the dust on the hard floors and mops it all in one go. And then it goes and dumps itself out, cleans it, and we're done. Like it'll move around my kids. It'll move around. I mean, we're already kind of heading that way.
Yeah.
And so if the minute they make one that does laundry, I'm there. Like, like that's just.
Yeah, and that's not a very difficult task even.
No. But the thing that it's done for us is it's created a much less stressful environment, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, she has more time. Like, she hated doing that. And, I hated having dirty floors. So there was this tension in our, I mean, it wasn't like a, make it or break it issue in our marriage, but it was like, for $1,000, I can pay to have a better marriage.
Yeah, absolutely.
No brainer.
It kind of goes back to the nail clipper idea, which is if you can make a little investment in something that doesn't suck and it makes your life better, then do that a couple times and your life is actually better. So
yeah. And I think all we're gonna have to see is some, like, I bought this because I saw it at my brother's house and I was like, we need one. And I think it's gonna be the same with the robots. One person buys one that does all the laundry and the cooking, the cleaning, like, it's gonna be viral.
I think the interesting thing to consider is what happens to us as a species, us as humans, when we have so much more time. Because getting more time hasn't always led to greater human flourishing.
True.
In our current moment, we have more free time than ever in some sense, more chance for recreation, and there's less. The work that it requires to keep, destitution at bay requires a smaller percentage of our overall time than maybe at any other point in history. And we're not really happier. We're not flourishing any more than we were. You look at things like anxiety, depression, obesity, the collapse of the family, the dehumanization that has happened at a colossal scale. We're not really better off for the extra time that we've gained. Now, I'm not making a causal connection there, but I'm just pointing out the relationship. And what it makes me think of is when Moses was going to Pharaoh to try to get the children of Israel out of Egypt. He said, "Let my people go so that they might go worship God in the wilderness." And it's the "so that" that really matters. Is, yes, getting out of bondage, being liberated from bondage is a good in and of itself. But there has to be a "so that."
It's good.
Just getting free from whatever it is that's tying you down isn't in and of itself the final answer. You have to get free so that you can do something higher and something better, so that you can worship God, so that you can bring something more beautiful into being. And I think it's an open question. I think with the technological revolution and the intelligence revolution that we're kind of on the cusp of, there's so much potential for enhancing human flourishing if we can find what the uniting stories are that we can live out in our lives together with our free time. If we can come together on what a future would look like. And that was the other question I had for today was what is the future that we need to navigate to in light of where we find ourselves in this moment of American life, where you've gone through the post-war era in the mid-century, and then you had the baby boomer generation. Now the baby boomers are getting older, and they're retiring and dying off. And now you have this technological revolution. You have a very polarized culture. You've got a culture that has lost a lot of the institutions that used to connect it. It's lost a lot of the guiding stories that it was built on. And so there's a lot of things that are kind of shaking. And I think a lot of conservatives want to go back to the way things were. And I think that's what a lot of the steam behind Trump's campaign is: make America great again. It's going back to something that was the golden years. And, maybe you think of that as the 1950s or 60s. Maybe you think of that as the 1980s. Whatever time frame you think of it, it doesn't exist anymore. There is nowhere to go back to. The things that were hypothetically good about those times in our history, it doesn't rob any of those good things to say that they don't exist anymore, and the things that made them don't exist anymore. And some of the things that those things were built on have been found to be faulty in the meantime. So there is no golden hour to return to. And that's the problem with the conservative movement. That's the problem with MAGA. That's the problem with what to do with all of our kind of political aspirations, because there is truly no return to anything. The left wants to tear everything down, to break down the kind of things that are too tightly constricting the culture, in their opinion. And the right just wants to go back and put the wall, build the walls higher. Or I'm not talking about the wall at the border. I think that would be a good idea, but I'm talking about the categories between things and the walls and the definitions that help us understand the world. Conservatives want to preserve that, and progressives want to just tear those things down and replace them with something else. And the challenge always is that when you tear down something that is the best thing that's ever existed in terms of human flourishing and all of that, and I'm talking about the Western worldview, Western capitalism, everything that we've experienced here in America in the past 250 years, give or take. When you tear down a system like that to replace it with something else, the risk is that it's very likely going to be replaced by something that's much, much worse than what you have now. And especially because you're starting with the best attempt we've ever made at finding a mode of being that produces human flourishing for the widest amount of people and provides a hierarchy of networks that people can find themselves in and can find their place in life and can bring forward the life that they want to, opportunity and all of that. You go back to the Soviet times, you go back to the revolution in Russia and, the Bolsheviks, the ushering in of communism, that, there's a big fervor to change, to break down the existing order and replace it with something else. It was revolution. And you saw that way back in the French Revolution. You saw that, you see that the Cultural Revolution happening, in different countries at different times. But there's a revolutionary impulse that wants to tear down the existing order and replace it with something else. And conservatives fight against that for obvious reasons. The challenge that I wanted to lay out for you tonight was that with the pace of change and with the ways that the stories, the level at which we understood our guiding stories has proven to be insufficient, and the stories themselves have not, are no longer connecting us. They're no longer tying us together like they used to. So what's the answer? What's the solution? What's the future that we move to? How do we navigate to a brighter future when there is nothing really truly to return to, and the vast majority of the options moving forward are much worse than the existing order? It's clear that in order to find a path forward that's better for as wide a group of people as possible, that would be a very narrow path. Very narrow. Like, most of the choices are going to suck more than the one we have now. And, one example, it's obvious, it would be something like collectivism or communism or some kind of utopian thinking to replace the current Western culture that's, that we still have the remnants of here in America. But just hanging on to what's left of the Western culture and, griping about the barbarians at the gate, which clearly that's, they are, but what's the alternative? How do we navigate to a brighter future? What's our process? What are the fundamental underlying things that we cannot give up on in order to navigate to that brighter future?
Yeah. Well, what I would say is, although I actually don't personally care for the term MAGA or Make America Great Again, because right or wrong, I do feel like the mainstream media, or maybe this is just a correct understanding, it's sort of positioned that as, well, I guess quite frankly, a little bit white supremacist, because I remember this in his first kind of run with Make America Great Again. There's a lot of talk about, like, are we talking about America when it was great, but it had slavery? Or are we talking about when America was great, but it had Jim Crow laws? What exact point in time in history are we talking about here where America was great? And are we saying we want to go back to that? So while I don't particularly care for the term, just because of some of the stuff that has come along with it, right or wrong, the term itself, Make America Great Again, I don't think is saying that we need to go back to do what we were doing. It's just acknowledging this country was great, this country is not as great, and we can do things to make this country great again. So in defense of the term, because I don't think, at least I've not personally heard things from that movement where they're actually trying to go back in history. And as it turns out, there's a lot of people, Elon certainly probably being the best example now, part of that movement, that are some of the most forward thinkers on the planet. So I don't know if they're attempting to go back to something so much as they're trying to make this country great again.
Okay, that's a very charitable interpretation, and I take that. That's good. That's a good input, and I don't disagree when we're talking about somebody like Elon. But I think at a population level, the baby boomers want to go back. The baby boomers want to go back to a time when things were good for them. That's always been the baby boomers thing. Is the baby boomers as a generation actually robbed us of a lot of opportunity because they were hyper focused on making things good for them in their time. And they still are. They're still, most of the politicians that are looting our future are baby boomer politicians. And they want, they're as a population, I'm not attacking any one boomer here, but at a population level, they have their whole life pillaged the future of our country, our people, and they've pillaged the future of their own families at a population level by hyper prioritizing that things are good in the short term for them.
So that's interesting. So it's interesting that that's your main viewpoint on that. I would have to think about it some more. I think to share that viewpoint, I think I just know too many, because the baby boomers, we're talking about our parents, right?
Yep. And again,
Yep.
I'm not attacking any one person. I'm talking
Yep.
about at a population level here.
Right. Yeah. So I think I know too many of them that were hardworking, diligent, did what they were conservative. They did what they thought was right, and it set them up well and set their kids up well. But see, what you're talking about, though, to me, is closer associated with conservatism than it is with MAGA. And I actually think this is partly why the MAGA movement is so repulsive to some people, because in some ways, politically, it is a new way forward. But I don't know that we were, wanting to make this super political. Zooming back a little bit to the more conservative viewpoint, the liberal viewpoint. By the way, you're right, Patrick, in that there are a lot of people that want to go back. A lot. And I will say this charitably, and okay. That's partly what's behind the homesteading phenomenon trend. Let's call it a trend, which I have zero problem with. Fantastic. It's appealing to me. I totally get it. But that is part of the appeal, is things were good in the past. Let's set up our life in a way that is like the past, even though it's 2024. That's part of the allure there. That's part of the appeal. And I'm not necessarily knocking it. I'm just saying that's what I see to be true. As we think about here's what I was thinking about, Patrick, in thinking about this topic is, instead of thinking about, is conservative the right way forward or is liberal the right way forward? I don't think that's super helpful. I think we need to be thinking about the right way forward.
That's right.
The right way forward. The way that maps with human flourishing. And look, this is just my personal philosophy, and I guess it's almost a hybrid of the conservative and liberal thing. But my personal philosophy is ensure the bases are covered and then go run wild and free. And to say that another way, what I'm saying is we need to understand what leads to human flourishing. We need to build society's foundation on those things. And it should be as few things as possible. But even with as few things as possible, it's still going to be quite a lot. My point is, let's not import anything in there that really shouldn't be in there. Because we need to make sure that things that are in there, because that's not going to be a good foundation if there's essential items that are missing. So let's make sure we have our society's foundation built on the things that lead to human flourishing, and then let's do whatever we want. Let's let people do whatever they want, so long as what they're doing doesn't cut against human flourishing. And when people do things that do cut against human flourishing, they need to be punished for that, to use an old-fashioned term, because they have to be, because this is not anything goes.
So I want to let Austin jump in too, but just on that note, real quick, I was having this conversation with somebody else, and they said something interesting relative to the human flourishing argument. They said, well, but how do you know what that is? How do you know what human flourishing is, or how do you know what leads to it? And as I dug into that question with them a bit, it became clear that the way they interpreted human flourishing was something akin to, if I get to pursue my short-term hedonic impulses at my whim, then
Wrong.
That's, what I'm equating flourishing to. And, it's, how do you disabuse someone of that notion without coming across as heavy-handed?
Sorry, that
Wrong.
got me.
What do you think, Oz?
Oh, man.
Can I say one more thing,
Yeah,
because
go
it's
ahead,
sort of
you're fine.
related to that,
Go.
Patrick, which is that, because I think this ties in, but I see liberals mainly going wrong when, instead of discovering new and interesting frontiers, they undermine what's proven to work for the sake of change.
Amen.
Look, you bump into a lot more liberals in Nashville than you do in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And I like it. I like part of it.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And some of them are just crazy. Some of them are just disconnected from the way the world really works.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, for one of both sides of this thing, there's plenty of conservatives that are stuck in the past, and their worldview and their modus operandi worked at that time, but it doesn't work so good anymore. It needs to be adjusted for the new information, the new culture, the new frontiers that we're discovering. So you can both sides of the thing, but I see that as a little bit less. I see a conservative stuck in the past as a little bit more abrasive relationally and less consequential. And I see a liberal who is not pursuing new frontiers, you know, and rather undermining things that are proven to work for the sake of change as a little easier relationally and far more consequential.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like on one side, you kind of get rubbed a little bit. It's irritating, but it's a little more harmless if you really dig into it. On the other side, it's not really that irritating. It's kind of cool. It's whatever. It's new. It's edgy. But some of it's really, really detrimental when you dig into it. So that's just what I see is like that we need to be finding the right way forward here. And back to how do you know, what contributes to human flourishing and what doesn't, try things. You got to fuck around to find out, right? And the thing is, and the thing is, you don't have to just try everything, because some of the stuff we have literally thousands of years of proof points to go back on. So we don't have to try everything. I can tell you right now, if you're going to be sleeping around, your marriage is going to suck.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to go test that one.
And
there's a
I
whole
think
bunch of others that are proven like that.
That's the issue that, comes up when you say, well, you got to try things, is there's a question of time frame. Well, it works, cocaine, works really, really well for about 10 minutes. It's not a great long-term strategy, but it's leads to profound flourishing for about 10 minutes, and so that's the extreme case. Point being, there are things that you can engage in that seem like they lead to flourishing in the short term that actually take you apart in the long run. And I'm talking about maybe even like let's say smoking a pack a day seems like it leads to flourishing for about 5 years, and then, starts to,
That's right.
it's like there's a time frame issue. Eating margarine, seems like a good idea in the 1980s, because it's less fat than butter. Well, you learn 15 years later that it's terrible for you, so there's all these things with the time frame. But then, to your point, there's patterns that we can look at in the world in the past to extract out the principles and extend that into the future, and not have to, try all those things, because that's wisdom. We've learned some of those things.
Yeah. And to your point about margin, this is why it's so important to not let science get co-opted as propaganda, because there was plenty of propaganda behind that margin thing. If you go back and look, there was money behind that. That was a concerted play. That was a strategy. That wasn't science saying, hey, we actually have discovered here, you all, that this is actually better. That was funded studies. That was an actual strategy from people who stood to gain. So we need to make sure that, look, we need to get science back.
Yeah. And here's
that's only
another
part of it. That's only part of it. That only speaks to part of the whole thing that we're talking about. And that's what's complicated, is because there's a lot here, but for that thing in particular, we need to know the truth.
Yeah. Plastic is another example where in the short term, it seems like it's led tremendously to human flourishing. I mean, you think about the advancements in our life, because we can use plastic to manufacture things cheaply. And, you can get buckets that take water to villages that don't have water. There's good uses of plastic, but over a 50-year time span, the microplastics are decimating our fertility, and they might lead us to the collapse of the human civilization. So does plastic lead to human flourishing? Well, it looks like it might lead to human extinction. I'm being a little bit melodramatic there, but point is, there is a time frame issue. So we need more than just it's more than just a short-term utility analysis that we have to do.
Absolutely. Well, what needs to be considered is the effect on you, short term and long term, the effect on those immediately around you, short-term and long-term, and the effect on society, short-term and long-term.
Yeah.
It's complicated, right? But
Well, and to tie this all together towards the teachings of Jesus, Jesus said, "I am the way. I am following me is the narrow way." And if you think about living your life in such a way that is good for, that is loving towards that entire community of people that you just described, you and you into the future, everybody around you and into the future, etc. It's like to act in such a way that is good for that whole community of people, both now and across time. That is an impossibly narrow way. That might be the way of Jesus, actually, as the only and highest way to live in a way that is good for that whole community of people across time.
It's hard to. It seems hard. How do I say this? It's hard to see like the path forward. Like that's what we were talking about, right? I'm just kind of circling this back. What is the path forward? Well, I mean, it's for us as Bible believing Christians, it's different. I mean, we're just a part of a different kingdom, and that's the bottom line for me. Is like if someone's not a part of the kingdom of God, well, how do they? Because everything's upside down. You give away everything to become rich. It's like you said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Any institution, spiritual institution that teaches there's multiple ways to get to the Father, sorry, it just doesn't work. Like there's only really one way. It's Jesus, and there's nothing that's going to take you there other than Him. And so talking about this from a spiritual standpoint, it's like wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and narrow is the way that leads to life. And that's not to heaven or hell. That's like the basic translation of that verse. Like that word life means Zoe, and it's a quality of life. It's a quality of life we get to live on earth down here if we find the way, but it's real tight. It's real. There's really only one way there. And that's just what I'm seeing with everything in my life. There's only one way. There's only one marriage. It's between a man and a wife. That's it. It's the only way. It's the only marriage that leads to life. There's only one way to God. It's through Jesus. So it's hard, when you try to fit two different, because we're talking about two different kingdoms, right? We're talking about society as a whole, but we live in society, but we're not a part of that kingdom. So it's like you can't fit a square peg in a round hole. So it's a tough question. I mean, it's.
But aren't you kind of answering the question too, in some sense, by saying that
for us, yeah.
Well, I mean, but I would push back on that and say that isn't that just simply for everyone. Like
it is,
okay.
But it's hard to explain an upside down kingdom to someone who's not a part of it. He's the king that no one wanted. Like
right, but I wonder if we understand that is the way to life. This is a part of the story that I feel that the church has failed to tell.
True.
Is that there is a path that leads to life.
There is.
And it's available for everyone.
True.
And it is the only path that leads to life. It's the way of love. And Jesus embodied that fully. And it is our and so your path to life and love, you extending yourself fully into love, dying and being reborn, ascending into a more true reflection of God's glory, more true imago Dei that He created you to be, more true to the pattern that He struck into being at the beginning of time. That leads to life, and everything else leads to destruction. But it's your path, and there's the thing that you were talking about, Kent, earlier, is we were talking about this idea that we have to kind of abstract out the principle, and you made the point that it would be ideal to abstract it out at the kind of least at the highest level, or the least explicit form. You only want in there what is absolutely crucial to have in there, and it is love. It's like the way of love. It's the law of love. There's one law, and that's the law of love, the law of God. And that law eventually invites everybody into harmony with it. That's every knee will bow. It draws everyone at the, and so it's a message for everyone. And it is hard and it's upside down, but it's also, it seems to me to be true about reality, like about every part of reality.
Let me paraphrase what I heard you guys talking back and forth with just a little bit there. The church has been telling us that Jesus is necessary for salvation. And then we need to get our politics and our culture right so that we can live a good life. And that's a damn shame, because there is way more to this picture. Like, if what we believe to be true here is that there was this being that always existed before anything, and then created, whether that was through the process of evolution or poof, I don't really care. Here we are. And we got here because there was a design, and this being was before all of it and will be after all of it. There is a pattern to our design. There is a way that we were created. There is a way that works best.
Yes.
And that is pretty much what the whole Bible is telling us through the stories, through the accounts, through the metaphors, through Jesus while he was here. And yes, part of that is you want to get the part of you that is going to live forever. If it's aligned properly, you want to get that right, because that's ultimately the most consequential thing about your entire life. Your body's going to die pretty soon, but there's a part of you that's going to live on. You want that part to be right. With whatever's going on, you want that to be right. That's the most consequential thing. So I'll give the church that. It's just, there's a lot more to be had here. And I think too often, we're hearing only about the salvation aspect and how your soul can be right. And we're sort of thinking that we need to leave it to the politicians to figure out how to best orient our society. And the problem with that is society is going to be oriented the best when it is structured on top of the laws of creation.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot that this comes back to what I was saying about we don't have to test everything. I was trying to sort of set the argument up sort of outside of the Bible in case someone doesn't believe there, but ultimately, from my viewpoint, it's still going to come back to the Bible, because that's what it's built on. But if you don't believe in the Bible, what you could do is you could read it, and then you could compare to the high points of human history, and you could see, when did things go well, and did they map closest to what the scripture is saying? When did things go worse, and when things went really bad, was it in congruence with the scripture, or was it in opposition to? And then you can still choose not to believe the Bible, but you can pick up on patterns. You can say, okay, I see what this book is saying. I see human history. I can clearly now see things go better for individuals and societies when we pattern our lives in a way that is congruent with what this book is trying to say. And I think that would be pretty irrefutable. So I just think, like, when we're basing our society on the way that things work best, they're going to work best. And we can get a lot of insight into how things work best from human history and seeing what the scripture has to say about it. Because even if someone doesn't believe the Bible or in God, what you have to acknowledge is so many people for thousands of years have believed there is a God out there, and somehow he spoke to us through that Bible. That's a pretty radical, pretty crazy thing to believe. You might want to be interested about whether that's true or not. And if you think it's not true, part of you should still be curious about the reasons they do believe that, and is there something that can be learned? And I think there's actually a lot that can be learned. But it also needs to be said that you're going to miss over a lot if you're just reading across the top of the pages, forgetting the context it was written in, forgetting the time it was written in, not paying attention to what it's trying to say underneath what it's saying. Like that, it's going to take all of that. But I do think there's a pattern out there that we can build our lives on. And I would also say, I would argue there's lots of ways we went wrong here, okay, in this country. But America being what, 250 years old, give or take, I'm not sure that this had ever been done before, quite to this level that we've seen with America, how young we are and what we've accomplished. One should be pretty curious about how that happened. And I understand that not everything we did has been very Christian. Let's be honest, a lot of what we have done has not been Christian. But I don't know that you could really make an argument that we didn't incorporate a lot of biblical values in the founding of this country. And I think that's what led to our success in such a short order.
Oh, well, there's no question. I mean, just fundamentally, things like men and women are created equal in the image of God. I mean, that's such a radical idea to put at the founding of your country and the founding documents of your country. And that we have inalienable rights that the government can't even, give us or take away. Yeah, those are absolutely fundamental to why things have turned out the way they have in our country.
Yeah, and to your point, Kent, if you think of just Matthew 5, 6, and 7, Sermon on the Mount is probably one of the most practical passages in Scripture. Like, Christianese aside, like you can set aside every single belief that we have about who God is and whether Jesus is alive and things you can set all that aside. And if you were just to experiment with Matthew 5, 6, and 7 and live your life off of those principles, things like turning the other cheek and, someone takes your coat, give him your hat too. Like things like that actually work. I mean,
100%. It's funny that you mentioned that because I had just pulled up the Beatitudes here on my computer just before you said Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And I've started to read the Beatitudes and other parts of the Bible too as just simply an extended meditation on the nature of reality by the creator of it. Right. So this is just the way reality is structured. Here I'm going to tell you, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The meek will inherit the earth. That's not that's the architect and the creator revealing the nature of reality to us. That's not that's not something that's believed at the ego consciousness level. That's something that's
practical,
lived in an embodied way that is true in the actual bits and bobs of time, space, and matter at the deepest level.
I'll give you one more example. Psalm 32 says something along the lines of, when I kept quiet, my bones rotted within me, but when I brought it to light, I found healing. That's a complete paraphrase, but you understand what I'm saying?
Yep.
Anyone who hears what I just said knows that it's true.
Yeah.
My 8-year-old kid knows that that's true. When they do something and they know it was wrong and they know it was bad and they fester on it, it's festering and it's cancer, essentially. They talk to mom and dad, maybe there's a consequence. Now they move past.
Mm-hmm.
Straight from the Bible.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
But Patrick, go
ahead.
Speaking of that foundation that we were talking about, I have 5 things that I think should be in there.
Yeah, go ahead.
If now's a good time.
I'd love that. You talk about the foundation of what can we reduce this down to as these fundamentals that we don't want to change moving forward?
Like if we think about some of the unshakable principles.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I have 5. And I guess as we think about how you structure society, of course, this would have I was thinking more in terms of how you're structuring society, but unshakable principles, speak the truth. You have to allow the truth to be spoken. And we're hearing a lot more about this in the last 5 to 10 years, in large part, thanks to Jordan Peterson. But I'm not sure we still totally get it. Or it could be that we get it so well that that's why the campaign is so fervent against it. That's actually entirely possible. But speak the truth. People need to speak the truth. Allow personal freedom where possible. That's how this country was so great That's one of the main reasons why this country had the success it did in such a short amount of time, was because people had freedom, and you can do things through people that are taking personal initiative through personal freedom in a way that you can never mastermind or architect or orchestrate yourself. So allow personal freedom where possible. You got to maintain law and order. This was an interesting, I had Fadi Busamra. I was talking to him. He used to be the chief investment officer for Nashville's pension fund, and it was like one of the best performing pension funds in the country, in government at least. And he was from Lebanon. He came over here when he was like 12 or 13 years old. And he was saying in one of the conversations that Lebanon needs to get, and this was a few years ago, but he was saying Lebanon needs to get back to, basically paraphrasing, a little bit more law and order so that it can receive investment.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you have a country where you don't have law and order, you can't invest.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to have law and order. I understand that term is triggering for some, but you have to have rules of the road. You have to have order. You have to have laws. And if you have those things set up and you can make society predictable, you can get investment, you can have growth, you can have all these things. So you have to have law and order. But we need to help those in need with the track back to self-sufficiency. And we need to resist the urge to force exceptional people to revert to the mean.
Mm-hmm.
So if I was setting up a society, all of these things basically come from the scripture implicitly, maybe more than explicitly, but those would be 5 I'd want to make sure that would get in that foundation.
Yeah, 100%. Those were a lot of the same ones that I was thinking about. Obviously, it all gets, there's one law ultimately, and that's the law of love. And love is best described, I think, as working towards the good of the other. And that other can include, God. It can include you tomorrow. It can include, your neighbor 10 years from now. But loving the other, seeking the flourishing of the other. And if we make sure that all of the patterns harmonize with that, it's like narrow that down. And then obviously truth becomes, truth and love go hand in hand. Truth serves love. And they're the fundamentals of reality. And then it's, individual freedom. Humans are made in the image of God. And when they are fully alive, they reflect that glory. And that's what we're all dying for. What do you think, Austin?
A lot of things. I've been mostly listening. Yeah, I still snow globing, I guess, like my wife says.
Look, here's what I'm thinking. It's fun to talk about this at a society/cultural level. But in my coaching, I'm interested in, and in my own life, I'm interested in discovering what the patterns are for me in my life, in my specific family. What are the patterns that I should adhere to in order to maximally live out and reflect the glory and the truth of God's design in me? And how do I maximally live in love, live a way that is good for the community of people we talked about? And so it starts with me. It starts in my heart. And, I think that's where the rubber meets the road, is what are the specific patterns in my life that lead to flourishing? And I think there's one of the things that I've kind of been noodling around on a bit is this idea that if you probably shouldn't make something a part of your life that would be bad for someone else if they tried it. Like, if you're sophisticated enough to be able to manage something and it doesn't bother you, but it wouldn't be good for your neighbor down the road, or it would potentially, and I think that's this idea that you don't want to cause your brother to stumble in some sense, is like a little bit that idea. But I think you have to be careful. We're very privileged, and we've grown up with a lot going for us. And so it's easy to read the tea leaves and think that we're making good decisions because we're perceiving ourselves as flourishing, but maybe we're skewed by the timeline issue we talked about earlier, or maybe we're a product of being in somewhat of a cocoon of, extraordinary opportunity or whatever the case might be. But in general, I think it's wise for me to not make a part of my life things that would be destructive for other people even if it doesn't harm me per se, it would be destructive for them.
It's interesting in the last year and a half. Like, I have people that I work with on an everyday basis that don't have any, we'll call it religious background, or they don't know Jesus like I do, and like they didn't grow up going to church. And it's always interesting. I don't know if it's me or the Lord or both, but I've had some really interesting spiritual conversations with them. It's really hard to, point someone kind of that way when you're talking about these things. Like one guy the way the conversation got started, we got talking about different Mennonites in the area, and he said, man, I don't even really know where to start with all this religious stuff. There seems to be so many different kinds of Mennonites, and I thought for a minute, and I'm like, okay, this seems like an opportunity. We were out for lunch, and it was someone I know, and all of a sudden it came to me. It must have been the Lord, because I'm not this smart. It was like, well, really, for us, or the way I try to live is it's like Jesus said, this is what I told him, there's two basic things. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then love your neighbor as yourself. And everything that I believe needs to be rooted in those two things. Everything that's not, well, doesn't really need to be there. And so it was an interesting conversation, just, kind of, and I've had other conversations, just this past week about, spiritual things, and it's fun talking to someone who had an opposing view that I did of abortion. And it was fun. Like, I like those conversations. I used to kind of be afraid of them, but man, I kind of look for them now. I just like hearing other people's points of view. And I feel like there's always little seeds that we can throw in those conversations if we allow, the Holy Spirit to kind of work through us. And so, but it is not as straightforward as you would think. It's like, we grew up with this stuff. We grew up with these principles. We grew up with the Beatitudes in Matthew 5:6. Just those things being hammered into us every day. And we take for granted what the foundation that we really have. And so when you talk to someone who doesn't, but it's interesting because everybody seems to have, at least the people that I've talked to, has some kind of a moral compass. Everyone does. I mean, whether they're liberal or conservative or whatever, it's really interesting to me that people have a moral compass. And in my industry, it's interesting. Some people will even use me as their moral compass. Well, what did you do from this scenario? Or how many miles did you ride off this year? I'm like, oh, so you haven't been tracking your mileage. So you're literally asking me because I track it. Like, it's just interesting, actually interacting with the world per se, or people that don't believe like I do on these things. Because it's like, where do you start? Start at the beginning, go from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, even if you think the Christian faith is untrue, it's hard to argue that it's not a good way to live your life.
Yes, and if it were untrue, it wouldn't, by definition, wouldn't be a good way to live your life.
It wouldn't stand either. Wouldn't still be here. It would have fallen a long time ago.
Over a long enough timeline, everything that's not in harmony with what is real will be destroyed. Only that which is real has existence over time. It's interesting, actually, to think about it from a evolutionary standpoint, because if there, I mean, I don't understand exactly. I don't think evolution explains the origin of species, but it clearly does explain the kind of, well, evolution of species. And the idea of God being the I am, the ground of being, that which from which all things come. It's like God is being itself. He's not a being among beings, but he's being itself. And so God is good and God is love. And so anything that is going to be over a long enough time frame has to harmonize with love, or else it runs at cross purposes to that which is most fundamental, and it fails to be. And maybe it gets kicked out of the gene pool, to go back to the evolutionary language. But anyway, that's probably a topic for another conversation. I'm curious, we should probably start winding it down, but before we do, I'm curious what some of the patterns are that you're evaluating in each of your lives through this lens of navigating more closely to the truth, living your life more truthfully, or more deeply aligned with love, or maybe to move towards healing in something in your life, something that, maybe you're evaluating a habit, mindset, or skill, or mode of being, pattern of thinking that you might find is no longer serving you and is actually keeping you from experiencing the fullness of God's love in certain parts of your life. Or maybe you're seeing an invitation that's glimmering from the horizon, that's inviting you into some grand new adventure of, you know what, maybe if I changed this, and I changed the way that I think about this, and I changed the story that I tell myself about that, I wonder if my nervous system would be more well regulated. Or, I'm just making an example, but yeah, are there patterns that you're evaluating in your own life that you're kind of seeking to be more wise and walk into greater flourishing on?
Yeah, most definitely for me. Um, practically speaking, and I'm not bragging or like saying that I've got it all together, but I have noticed, like, I've been experimenting with prayer, and nothing crazy, not like, hours and hours each day, but I've been trying to be more disciplined in this way, and I have noticed that my anxiety and stress levels are, even if I'm not, even if I don't think I'm stressed or anxious, I've noticed that I'm more at peace. And I know it's super practical, but it works. And I don't know how to explain it other than that. Like, I'm experimenting with it, and it's, very being very real. Like in the last week, I kind of, like, we went to Nashville and we, broke up my routine, and I haven't got back into routine. Well, over the last 3-4 days, I've noticed, I'm like, why am I anxious? Like, why does this bother me that normally doesn't? And so just take an inventory, what did I or did I not do? And, what can I do to help curb this? The common denominator was like, well, I've been praying less.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not even like praying to get something. It's like I'm trying to create a dialogue in prayer, not a monologue,
Mm-hmm.
not just like spitting out what I need.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to actually, like, prayer can look like just asking a question and sitting there for 5 minutes in silence.
Yep. Yep.
It can look like meditation. It's so many times I think we come with this list, and I'm trying to break out of the religiosity of prayer and making it super practical for me, and like just even just taking a verse or a concept and just meditating on it for 5-10 minutes and asking the Lord to reveal things that I haven't seen. That's prayer. I mean, like,
Yep.
so many times I think it's like we come with this goal in mind of like, I need to accomplish X, Y, and Z, and if I pray for this need for 10 minutes, it'll work, So that's just me, like being super practical and something that
I love that.
Yeah.
It actually answers, in part, it answers a question that I had. I didn't put it in the show notes, but I was thinking about, as I think about my own level of anxiety, it's kind of there's acute anxiety that might come up in a certain situation, and then there's kind of this ambient anxiety that you just kind of
Yeah.
live with, right?
underlying.
Underlying thing. And
Mhm.
my theory is that anxiety might, in my life at least, and maybe at large, might be best understood as a marker for, or an indicator that something about my map of reality is off.
Imbalance.
And the extent to which I experience anxiety might be correlated to the degree to which my understanding is not complete or not good enough, or maybe there's a part of my life that I've swept under the rug in my consciousness,
Good.
and I'm not looking at it, and maybe I don't want to look at it, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to make me anxious. It's like, for example, if I have a whole box of mail that's come in, and I know there's some bills in there that are due, but I just keep that box and I just put those in a drawer. And we do this in all kinds of ways in our psyche all the time. We just put the bills in the drawer instead of getting them out and paying them and facing it and paying them. And I think the level of my anxiety is directly correlated to how many things are in the drawer that I need to be pulling out and looking at and reorienting my map. And so maybe anxiety is a gift to draw my attention to the fact that there's something in my life that's not harmonizing with the way things are created to be, and is running at cross purposes to them. And what I'm feeling is the dissonance of the pattern in my life, the pattern in my thinking, with the underlying nature of reality. And that dissonance presents itself as anxiety.
It's good. I never thought about anxiety as a gift. Again, I'm not professing to have the answers. I just know that we're just always going to have to live with a certain level of stress. It will just never go away. And that's not a bad thing. You think about working out, like stress on your muscles, like stress and anxiety are just there. And we try to do things to eliminate that or mitigate it. And sometimes I think it's misguided. I think it's like you said, that there's situational anxiety, and then there's like underlying anxiety. And for me, it's when the underlying anxiety, like I get to the end of the day and I'm like, heck, am I stressed? Like, what's going on? And most times it's because something was shoved under the rug, either in the short term or the long term. And
Yep.
I will never discover that if I don't take time to sit in it. And
Yes.
that can be prayer. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's more how I trying to approach
my
it.
friend Jamie George is so good at reminding me of this, is that curiosity is necessary for the kingdom of heaven. You can't, like, you have to foster a kind of compassionate inquiry. When you're coming to a place in your life where you're like, dang, my anxiety is through the roof. This sucks. Like, it does not feel good. It's easy to judge that, easy to drop into judgment, but you really just have to be curious about it and go like, what is it exactly that I might be shoving under the rug, putting in the drawer, not looking at? But you're right. There's healthy stress. The term, I think, is hormetic stress, where you take a cold plunge and you stress yourself. And the fact that hormetic stress is healing is pointed out in both the Old Testament and New Testament. When Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, God told him to make a snake and lift it up in the serpent on the stick, and people who were bitten by the poisonous snakes would be healed when they look at it. They exposed themselves voluntarily to looking at the thing that was killing them, and that healed them for whatever reason. So there's this idea that hormetic stress, voluntarily undertaken, is healing. And Jesus said that just like Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up. So something about gazing at that awful reality is healing as well. And I think that it seems to be baked into the nature of reality that hormetic stress is healing. When we voluntarily face something stressful and we undertake it on purpose, we face it, we heal. But it's when we run and we keep avoiding and we keep
Or medicate.
Yeah, and it's part of avoiding, part of running. Mm-hmm. And then the anxiety just continues to grow.
Yeah, Patrick, to your question, for me, it's two things. One, short term, not that worried about it. The other, more worried about it. And it has to do with my mind and mindset. The shorter term one is just for some reason, I've just been feeling down the last several weeks. Really not sure why. I genuinely not sure. I don't know if it's a change of seasons. I don't know if it's no idea, but not that worried about it. It happens. And, a few times, I've thought about what we just talked about a couple episodes ago, which is like, hey, if you're in a down state, you can't totally trust your mind. Sometimes you just need to keep putting one foot in front of the other and know that it's going to get better and you won't feel like this forever. So that's the shorter term one, the one I'm not that worried about. The one it's interesting you brought that up, that I'm curious about is, you guys know this, but I went through a pretty rough experience in business a few years ago. And it is, what I sense is it's entirely possible parts of me will never be the same. And, maybe there's parts of me that are broken, possibly. And what I don't know is like, are those parts going to grow back? If there are things that are broken, are they going to heal? Or is there some things that are lost forever? And I just notice it plainly in the areas of energy, vision for the future, a positive outlook, belief in a better day. You may as well not be an entrepreneur if you don't believe like that a few years from now or down the road is going to be better than today, right? Like, if you don't have that belief, you should most definitely just go get a day job somewhere and enjoy that, go through the days or whatever. But a huge part of the entrepreneurial thing is actually believing that you can build something so that at some point down the road, it's going to be better than it is today.
Right.
That's a massive piece of that whole thing. And that part of me feels a little broken. So I sort of know it to be true, but I'm not always so sure. And, and I guess you could even use words like, I almost feel a little more cynical, a little more, maybe less optimistic overall sometimes. And I'm hoping that this can be a season and I can sort of grow through that, because I do see some of those elements as being pretty key, pretty important to not only being an entrepreneur, but just to living a happy, fulfilled, flourished life.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the more macro one that I'm more worried about. And also sort of, I guess I've just been sort of curious about it.
Yeah, it's interesting because you definitely went through what I think anybody would agree was traumatic at several levels. I mean, the loss that you experienced was a traumatic loss, and those wounds, cut us to our core, and we are different forever.
Yeah. And not all bad ways.
But that's the point, not all bad ways. And maybe even not really in bad ways at all. Maybe in ways that are different, but strengthen something in us that will turn out to be good.
Yeah, exactly right.
Back to the Beatitudes.
If I could just speak to that for a minute, though, Ken, from someone who's known you your whole life, like, my perspective is that you're still Kent, and that, like, in my mind, and I know we're not doing life every day, and I mean this in all sincerity, like, you're still the same guy that I knew before this happened. You still have the same, I don't know, sense of humor, personality. Like, I'm sure there's things there that probably could use healing, but, from my perspective, even just being with you this past weekend or whatever, I guess I don't even really see that. And I'm not living in your house, sleeping in your bed, that kind of thing, so I don't know all the ins and outs, but, and I'm not trying to make light of your problem. I'm just telling you from someone who's your friend who loves you, like, you're still the same Kent, and I don't really judge you or look at you any differently than, I did before the whole thing. And I don't know everything that happened, but I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I appreciate that for sure. And at the level of who I am as a person, I will say that that has been a huge gain. I'm actually not so sure I wouldn't go back through the whole thing again just to gain what I gained as a person. But when it comes to the business end of the stick, there's
Even that, you're killing
definitely
it, man. Come on.
no, there's definitely some differences. But anyhow, that's my answer to your question, Patrick.
I love it. Good. All right. Well, we've talked about some patterns that we don't want to lose. We've talked about what we're all working on. One of the things I've been thinking about in terms of patterns and things I want to change is I think I need to go harder. I think there's always some tension between the idea of just being and being in the present moment, that non-anxious presence that is, the kingdom of heaven, present moment, being in that and creating from a place of non-anxious presence. That's flow state. That's what I want. But what I've been noticing as I look at my life right now is, even as I'm trying to optimize across a couple different channels here, there's things that I've gotten in place that are good now, but I'm still not, like, I'm still holding back a little bit. For example, my workouts. I used to never be able to get my workouts in consistently. Well, now I do. I've dialed that in. It's part of my habit. I work out 5 times a week, and I don't really think about it. It just is part of my life. And that's good. I'm glad I got that pattern instantiated into my life. But, now that pattern's there, back to like what might be swept under the rug, it's like, you know what? There's a fair amount of time I'm just phoning it in. Like, I go do my workout, but I'm not, maybe I turn it up to about a 6 or a 7. I'm not going 9.9 on anything. I don't have anybody I'm working out with. It's just me out there. It's dark 30 in the morning. I'm just, doing my thing, and I kind of get into the motions. Like, I need to continue to put myself in situations where I'm challenged so that something more comes out of me. So I give a little more. And workouts are one of those things right now. So I recognize the need to turn it up some in the workout department. So that's kind of what I'll do that tomorrow morning. How about that? I'll make a commitment to you guys to go at least to an 8.2 on that deal. So.
Definitely do it. Do that 8.2. Patrick, I know we're over time, but can I just say something real quick?
Of course.
This was in the last week or two, 34-year-old, I believe single lady, Alyssa Lokitz, Lokits, PhD, sister of one of the members at the gym I go to, CrossFit Forte, was hiking on a hiking trail about 20 minutes southeast of Nashville. Not sure what time of day. And some dude jumped out of the bushes and attempted to rape her. She resisted. He wound up shooting her. She died on the hiking trail. Either went to Vandy or teaches at Vandy. I think maybe teaches at Vandy. Just the best. All her friends and all her family, she's just the best person you could possibly imagine. Went for a hike, and now she's dead, and I'm fucking pissed.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, we need to have a society that is safe for everyone.
Yeah.
And when a woman goes on a hike in Nashville, Tennessee, 20 minutes from my house, 10 minutes from my friend's office, I believe it was during the day. I do not think it was after dark, but I'm not sure on that. It's just too close to home,
Yeah.
and I'm tired of it. It's stupid, and there needs to be major consequences for stuff like that. If you're going to take a life of an innocent person, and it was for sure you, then there needs to be a discussion about your life being taken also.
Absolutely.
And that's just where I'm at. I'm upset about it. This is Nashville, Tennessee. I have 2 daughters. I have a wife. It's just we cannot have a properly functioning society if our women are afraid to walk outdoors.
Yeah.
So that's all I wanted to say about that.
I had the same response when I read that. I was just down on the Vanderbilt campus this weekend again, and this just happened. What, Friday night, Saturday night? I forget. But yes, it was shocking to see that story come out, and infuriating. And it made me think we might need to bring back public execution. But no, for real. I mean, there has
would
to
help.
be some kind of way to, if we're going to create a society that is oriented towards love, there has to be, what do you do about the person that's raping and murdering beautiful young women? It's like, that can't be. You can't have that.
We need punishments that fit the crime.
Yeah. Austin, are you equally outraged, but maybe slightly more philosophical about all this?
I'm
Or what's
just
your
kind
thought?
of in shock. I didn't know this happened. So that's awful.
It just
You
hits.
knew
It
her?
just hit. It's one thing when you see it in the news article.
Yeah,
Like
but you knew her.
I know there was this girl that was killed in Syracuse by some illegal.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it sucks. But you read about it in the article when you don't know them. But good grief, when it's a sister of one of your fellow gym member, not that far from my house and walking distance from my friend's office. I think in the day, it's just it hits different, and I'm pissed about it.
Please tell me they
Yeah.
called him.
Yeah, they got him.
Okay, good. Oops.
He'll live on the taxpayer dole for the next 60 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have to create in our societies structures that protect the vulnerable and institutions that protect the vulnerable. And yeah, you can't have that. That's not going to work. So it does make me think about, and I know we need to go, but it does make me think about the category of what is wisdom for me as a dad and a husband when it comes to the safety and well-being of my wife and kids, and how do I appropriately plan to and execute on the building of an ark of safety, to reference the Noah story, against the inevitable floods that will come. Might
Can we
not
talk
be
about that sometime? Put that on.
Yeah, 'cause let's
I
make
would.
a whole
I've got
episode
a
about that.
4-year-old and a 1.5-year-old, and you guys have girls that are at different stages than my girls, and dude, their safety is constantly on my mind. I mean, almost to a point where there were been time where it was unhealthy, the amount of fear that I had about them. So I know we don't have time to dive into it tonight, but could we maybe
Let's put that on the
practically? I'd love
docket.
to
Yeah.
hear. Yeah,
Put it in the
hear
doc,
what you guys
Austin.
have to say.
Put it in the doc.
What's that?
Put it in the
Okay, I'll go to
document.
the doc. I'll put it on. All right. Okay.
I love it. Well, it's been great to chat tonight. Why don't we wrap it up with a quick round on what are you working on? What do you want to plug tonight? Kent, how are things going at Amish Co? Just give us a quick rundown.
Yep, good. We got our help in operations, so we're all good there. So I don't think I have anything to plug tonight.
Cool. Austin, what's up with you?
Same.
All right.
Plug it away. I don't really have anything to plug about either.
Cool. Well, I'll just put a quick plug in for the Good King coaching and mentorship community. We're growing, adding guys every week, and it's great. I'm walking alongside guys figuring out some of the same things that we talked about tonight. What are the patterns that I want to bring forward in my life? How do I amplify the best that God has created in me? How do I take a look at what I've shoved under the rug and bring that out into the light and update my consciousness? How do I repent, move forward, walk in love, and create flourishing and peace in our family, in my home, in my heart? So that's what we're doing at the Good King, goodking.life on Instagram and goodking.life on the web. So check it out. All right, go to Mettle and Forge, METTLE, Mettle and Forge, and drop a question or a topic that you'd like to have us address on a future episode of the program. Thank you for being here. We appreciate you all, and I hope you have a very good rest of your day.
See you, boys. Love you.
See ya.
Love you. See ya.